Hello and welcome to the Stack Magazine's podcast. My name is Stephen Watson and I run Stack, the independent magazine club that delivers a different independent publication to your door every month. In this episode, I'm speaking with John Power Jr., editor and art director of Wyrd Science, the tabletop gaming magazine that's made for people who know there's much more to a night in than just Dungeons and Dragons, and which continues to evolve from issue to issue. John, I've got you in a very hot, windowless room on like one of the hottest days of the year. Thank you very much for making time to talk.
No, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I can see for anyone who's watching this like as a video, we can basically see like your magazine made manifest all around you there. So you're working. You're in Brussels, right?
Yeah, so I'm in Brussels. Been here for like just over a decade, and yeah, so this is my lair basically, surrounded by all the things, useless and otherwise, that I'm a hoarder basically. I think that sums up, and that's probably got me where I am today. That I love collecting stuff, and much to other people's displeasure, but yeah, it's I think that's a key part of the magazine is my love of things. I think is objects and just curiosity about and having nice, beautiful design things all around me, and a bit of a mess, but.
This all makes sense. Okay, so we've got the hoarder with a love for design. I can see how this is like sort of working itself into a magazine. But give us maybe the slightly more straightforward version. How did this magazine Wyrd Science come about?
Yeah, so I've been working for on and off most of my adult life in the music industry. I was working either as a PR for a lot of labels, so I worked. I've run campaigns for like Warp Records on occasion. I wish I'd done more for them, but I've done a couple of things for them, a couple of things like Nina Tune. Over here in Belgium, Eskimo. So I've worked with lots of record labels for years, doing their PR, bit of marketing, and stuff like that. So I've always worked with journalists, and I've written myself for like Time Out, DJ Mag. I've written for lots, and especially online, new millions of sites that no longer exist, like about art, music, and culture. So that was kind of my life. And then about 10 years ago, I randomly got back into board games. Getting older, can't go out to clubs as much, so you need to do something different with your evenings. So I kind of rediscovered board games, and they've been, over the last 15, 20 years, they've been this revival revolution going on there. And that, I tend to get obsessive about things I get interested in. And so soon there were board games piling up everywhere. And I was constantly thinking, like, the games have really come on. I was into this when I was a kid. So up until about 15, before music took over my life, I was really into, really nerdy stuff, role-playing games, Warhammer and all this kind of stuff. And then music came along and all that went out the window. And so I kind of started getting into it. I was looking into it and I was like, okay, well, the games look very different now. They play very different now. There's a very different audience. It's a much, when I was growing up, it was a very young white males kind of thing. And that had really changed. And there was really good design in some of these games. They looked beautiful. What they were about had completely changed. You could now, board games completely changed, but role-playing games especially, which we think of Dungeons and Dragons and we think of pretending to be an elf and going into a cave and killing something. And that's still, don't get me wrong, that's still, 90% of it. But, it had really changed. And there were games that were, that covered every aspect of life and allowed people to experience every part of life. And they were being written by all kinds of people. And I just found it really fascinating. And I was looking around and, you'd get every 6 months, The Guardian would do, there's a board game revival happening. And, literally type in board game revival, The Guardian, and you will find about 30 articles. Every 6 months, regular as clockwork, they just knock it out. And but even then, things like Warhammer, once a year they'd be like, this weird nerdy thing is inexplicably massive. And part of that is Games Workshop, the company that owns it. It's their fault because they refuse to kind of do any kind of press. But you're sitting there going, this is, it's still treated as this weird thing. He said there's a Warhammer shop on every high street in the UK. Like they're massive, like they're like the half our economy is plastic toys now. You'd never hear that in the Brexit discussions, but talk about fishing and all that. But honestly, like Games Workshop makes up about 50% of the UK economy at the moment. So, and it was never being treated seriously, and it just didn't make sense because it's like, well, since like 2000, if you look at the top 10 grossing films or whatever, it's all science fiction, Lord of the Rings, Marvel films. That kind of nerd culture is part of. It's not niche. It's a huge thing, but it's still being treated by the media as this kind of. It was either being completely ignored, or the few kind of inside magazines, so little media for it. But what was covering it just wasn't. We're still treating it like within the industry. It's been treated in the same way as they were doing it 20, 30 years ago. And for me, I was like, there's a gap there, but I just didn't have the time. I was so busy with doing the music stuff, and then of course, and like about 2018, 19 or something, there's a real groundswell of zine culture came back in, especially with people like Weird Walk and Hellebore and kind of certainly around that kind of folklore and esoteric stuff, which have been into since a kid. And so you had all these really, really cool, Weird Walk and stuff like that were coming from it from in a really interesting way. Whereas, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about folklore and stuff like that, but we also consider rave culture or flat roof pubs to be part of British folklore. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do something like that for games. And so my original idea was just, I'll just do this little zine, but I never had the time. And then COVID happens, obviously, and this is probably a very familiar story to a lot of people doing this. And about 2 months in, I realised, oh, there's no festivals this year. All the albums I was working on have been cancelled. And I was like, oh, everyone's saying, oh, it's 3 months. And I was like, no. We're working to like 1.5 year schedules. And I'm seeing nothing in the diary for this is going to be a long haul deal. And at first I thought, great. I was pretty much burnt out at that point from my career. And I was like, what I really need to do is sit down, do a lot of running, and finally play Red Dead Redemption 3, which I'd had sat there. And I thought that'll be 6 months of just playing on the Xbox. And then, of course, my wife starts working from home as well. So suddenly me sitting around on the sofa playing on the Xbox feels a little less kind of doable. So I thought I need to do something I thought, oh, I had this idea for a magazine. So I started it. And me being me, I find, originally it was going to be this like 24-page zine. And I got carried away, as you do. And suddenly it was like a 112-page magazine. And I had to teach myself how to do all the, the layout and the graphic designs. I couldn't afford to get anyone else to do it. And I discovered, oh, God, I really love doing this. And we did the first one. We did a Kickstarter for it. There's a real culture with games around Kickstarting. Like everything goes through Kickstarter these days. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. And I thought, okay, there's a real tradition of print. Everyone wants print books in the role-playing game world. They always sell well. So I thought, okay, there is a print market there. So I'll give this a go. And we got like 300 backers or something. And I thought, okay, I'm going to print up 600 copies. And, down there, I've still got boxes. I've run about 4 record labels over the years, and I still have boxes and boxes of unsold 12 inches and 7 inches dating back years and years. So I kind of thought, okay, it's going to be a bit like that, but I'll get 600 done. And it sold out in a week. And I was like, oh God, okay. So printed up another 500. That sold out in that first month. And suddenly I was like, this is this silly little thing I've done to keep me occupied has really struck a chord with people. And it's, and I really enjoyed doing it. So I got to, yeah, so I did the second one, and that did even better. Um, and it's an odd one. I've worked in and around magazines all my life, freelancing for them, and obviously being a PR and stuff. But I've never been staff, so I've never been into the offices and sat around and seen the day to day. So I was just kind of making it up as I go along. I've got ended up buying a shelf load of books on, how to design a magazine, and sort of, okay, that goes there, learning everything. But yeah, just making it up as I go along. And I always said that the biggest problem I had was I I didn't expect it to be successful. So I planned for everything but success. So when success in inverted commas came along, I made countless very terrible mistakes. But we'll probably get onto that. But I just
Well,
really loved it.
let's get right onto it. I want to know the mistakes. Well, what did you do wrong?
Well, I mean, the first thing obviously is you don't know how many you're going to print. So, and then you print up 500 or 600, and then you do the second 500, and in your head you're like, oh, the job's been done, so they just got to run off another. But no, obviously doing 500, and then I did another five. So if I'd just done 1,500 in the first go, obviously it would have saved me a vast chunk of money. Then the first issue, because I lived in Brussels, had my sister kind of sending it out, packaging it all up and sending it out. And again, that's because I thought we were going to do like 300. So I thought between her and her kids, that's like an afternoon's work. Second issue, we did 2,500 copies. And, it's at that point, you're like, you're literally having a ton of magazines dumped on someone's driveway. And, so I had to find a distributor quickly, and I ended up, I really don't know why, because quickly, that's why, ended up with this fulfillment company who mainly did kind of huge, huge stuff. So obviously we're like the tiniest thing they do, and they were okay at first, but then they weren't. And as soon as things started going wrong, we were irrelevant to them. We had 500 copies left on a runway in America during a storm. So they got destroyed effectively. They had to be reprinted. This new distribution company, they managed to lose a load. Then Brexit came in, and they suddenly were like, we're going to start charging you 3 times as much for everything. And COVID was happening, and one by one, there were things happening. I made a huge after the second one. I was like, this is really going well, but I don't want to be running a Kickstarter for every issue because it's a bright pain in the arse. So I thought I'll do a Kickstarter where people can buy 4 copies. So I was like trying to go quarterly at that point. And I thought, okay, that's nice. And it was just, I don't know, this would probably resonate with a lot of people listening to this, but between like issue 2 and 3, we've had, like COVID, Brexit, the war in Ukraine had kicked off. There was just all these things that something like print costs had gone up about 30%. Shipping costs seem to have gone up about 30%. I had all the VAT stuff from the EU. It was one thing after another. And suddenly it was like, I've taken all the money from everyone for 4 issues. And then a few things happened. It got delayed. And instead of getting it out in a year, it took like 2 years to get it out. And by the time the 6th issue came out, I was thinking of it as like my Blue Monday. It was like costing me more to make this, than I was making back off it. So it was like, it was frankly a disaster. But yeah, it's these things you learn, and hopefully you don't lose too much and you can somehow carry on. But there's, it's an odd thing, there's not, there's little support. There are Stack, obviously I listen to. I'm a member of the International Magazine Centre, and lately, obviously going on trying to find out that. But it's like this industry of a lot of, you have the EMAPs, the Bowers and the stuff. And then you've got this kind of world of all people like me and people like all the magazines that I've got set up here who are 1 or 2 people who, got into it because they thought it would be an interesting idea, and then suddenly it takes over their life, and it's their for me
Yeah.
it's become my day job, unexpectedly. And you're
Yeah.
constantly having to
Yeah.
figure out things that don't you'd never kind of guess that. And everyone's different as well, because it's not even like every magazine is the same. There's certain things that we all share, the practical principles and the things that we all have to deal with, distribution and stuff like that. But every sector has its own kind of, you know, I look at travel and food magazines with so much envy, because just these beautiful photos, and I just think, oh, you can get away with just doing like a 10-page photo shoot or something like that. I picked up
Yeah.
the new
Yeah.
issue of Thrasher the other day, skateboard magazine, and it's like 160 pages, 70 of which are adverts. And every advert looks like their editorial content. So if you're just flicking through it, it just, the adverts are as good, if not better, than their editorial content. It's the same skaters, it's the same clothes, it's the same tricks, so everyone's got their own kind of battles they're fighting, or their own kind of thing. And you just make mistakes. I mean, like, the last few issues of Wyrd Science have been about 70,000 words each or something, which is like, it's a novella, or a proper novel or something. And, you know, you didn't, it'd been lovely if I'd had someone there put their hand on my shoulder, like on issue 2, and be like, you know what, that, you know, 5,000 word feature you've crammed into 6 pages could be, 18 pages long, or, why haven't you got more white space in there? Why haven't you got, a photo shoot or something like that? And you kind of learn that as you go along.
These are all things that you've had to like learn the hard way, basically, just by like figuring it out and doing it yourself. But I understand that you're going to a quarterly frequency from the next issue. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's been the goal for ages to go quarterly. I mean, in so many ways, for the kind of magazine I want to produce, it financially, it only makes sense. You look at our sales, and we have this huge spike, and then we have like 2 or 3 months where it slowly trails down. And if it's a year between issues, you're paying for a lot of warehousing space and all the other things that, every other day it's like you get a bill for something that you remember, and yeah. So yeah, for me, it makes sense to do it quarterly. And also, the kind of person I am, I put so much into it that I'm just, I'm done by the end of it. And then if it's 6 months and I pick up again, it's like learning it all again from scratch. So now we're trying to do it bang, finish, have a little 2-week break while I wait for it to be printed, and try and recover and relax, and then go straight into the next one. So that, I mean, for me as a writer, I find I used to be a very fast writer. I was never the best writer, but I was good at delivering fast, relatively clean copy with a bit of, good chucking jokes in. But as I've got older, to my horror, found I've slowed down. My brain just doesn't work as fast anymore. And there's so much else that I'm dealing with and stuff like that. So it's been good trying to keep up that momentum between issues, so that we're going straight in. And after, say, issue 6, things were financially a bit dodgy. And I took a break after that. I went off and did a few albums for a couple of the record labels I worked with, just to get some money back in. And then I thought, I'll give it one more go with issue 7. And we did a kind of soft relaunch, changed the look of it, added some bits that changed up how what we featured and stuff. And it suddenly took back off again. And the last issue 7 and 8 have done, phenomenal for us, really well. And we've actually, I've managed to build up a little bit of a war chest. So also, like, now I'm commissioning people features that aren't going to, be published for 2 issues or something like that. But I can build up a drawer of stuff that I know that if something happens, I've got something in the drawer that I can turn to, and I can just give people more time to work on stuff. And certainly the art, we like to commission a lot of original art, and I like to give, and the more time I can give people, A, the better they're going to make it. But also, we're a small thing, and we try and pay everyone well, but certainly if I say to someone, you've got 4 months to do this rather than you've got 2 weeks to do it, then, people can be a bit, certainly artists can fit it in around their bigger jobs and stuff like that. And it
Yes. Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
easier to plan stuff. And hopefully with that, more regular schedule, we'll, you know, have, we've been talking about going into retail. We're in a few shops, there's a few shops that, absolutely love the, rare mags and stuff like that we're in, and it's great. But we don't really have retail distribution, so it's that I do myself. And we've talked to a few distributors, and I get the feeling that, you think it's going to save you, you're going to make a lot of money because suddenly you're in WH Smith's or you're in Waterstones. And, when I talk to people, they're like, no, no, it doesn't at all. But it gets you out there, and it's like it's a literal shop window. So now we've got a bit of money, I can think about, okay, well, that's good. Maybe I can take the risk of printing up an extra 2,000 copies and getting in Barnes and Noble in the US or whoever. And I can talk to, the few people who have got money in our industry and try and get advertising and stuff like that. If I can actually say to them, okay, March, June, September, December, there's going to be a magazine out, then, people can plan around that rather than, as it has been, a little bit more chaotic, to be honest. Right.
So switching this up to the quarterly schedule obviously just means that it's going to intensify. You're going to have more stuff happening. I see from the masthead, you are editor and art director and copy editor and the marketing department and the ad sales department and the publisher. So have you got help coming to help you with the shift to quarterly, or are you're planning on finding more hours in the week?
I'm finding more hours in the week, but I mean, there are certain things that, if you go through every issue, I have the way my brain works is it doesn't generally, it kind of one thing after another. And I'm quite restless in terms of what I like. So the first issue, and because I'm not a graphic designer, I've been kind of teaching myself as I go along. So, I've, there's no 2 issues that look quite the same. That each one is, either big or small changes. But with the last 2, I finally found something that I'm kind of, it's always going to be a work in progress. And even the next one, we're changing stuff, but the template is essentially there. And that makes life, that's the obvious thing, really. It's like, I know when I've got the flat plan out and I'm planning the next issue, I know now that, okay, we're going to have, I've got the regular columns. I know there's going to be 4 pages is going to be for a kind of news thing, 4 pages for this. I know that we're going to have a photo shoot at the front. So I can plan ahead with these things, and it's rather than inventing it from wholesale, whole cloth each time. I've got things in place, and I'm not dicking around with changing this and trying to find, new fonts or whatever. I'm like, okay, forcing myself to like, okay, let's do 4 issues that look coherent and the same. And the other thing is, it's like working with the writers I've got, of like, I'm always looking for new writers, but we've got, a core group of like 5 or 6 now who've kind of come together over the last couple of issues, who really get what I'm trying to do with the magazine. Because it's not 100% similar to anything else that there is at the moment in the gaming industry, or traditionally has been. And they're good writers. They're really good writers. So there's a lot more I can just punt onto other people now in terms of, before I was kind of writing 2/3 of it under pseudonyms and whatever as well, but now I'm more comfortable saying, like, you get what I want. And, and I'm more comfortable as an editor briefing people, and being a bit more, because that was a big learning curve. There's a big thing with, it's nobody appointed me to this job. It wasn't like I hadn't earned the position. It wasn't like I'd been promoted to editor. I just said, I've got some spare time and I want to make this magazine. And that is, I think, the way to do it. But at the same time, it also, someone like me, there is always that feeling of, what right have I got to tell other people that, no, that writing's neat, go away, come back, redo it, or no, I want you to do it like this, do it like that. Um, and I finally realized that just to get the better out of other people, I need to be more like that, and it gets the better out of me. And it's having that stronger idea of what, because the whole point of the magazine, just to round this through, is like, my whole point of it is there's one thing that I've always loved is like culture and subcultures and what they mean, and whether it's music, fashion, art, any of these things. And I just think it's because it's the one power that we have as ordinary people to affect society in a wider way. So much is we're governed from top down, and whether it's, governments or massive companies or whatever, they dictate so much of our lives. And for whatever, throughout history, certainly the 20th century, 21st century, the one thing that the ordinary person has is that, it's our music, it's our fashion that drives and goes upwards. It's one of the few examples of something where the bottom can influence the top. And eventually things, people can look at whether it's like the 60s or punk or, you know, uh, you know, Liverpool kids in the 1960s had an outsized effect on the whole world, and that's great. London punks, Manchester in the 80s, Bristol in the 90s. It's driven from working middle class, even middle class culture. It's the mass of people whose ideas and innovation drives it. So I've always been interested in cultures and subcultures. And this is the thing with games. If you were to say, what does music tell you about the 1960s? You can obviously sit there and say, you can use music as a prism, a way of looking at the world, and you can explain it, certain elements of it. You can do that fashion, and no one would bat an eyelid. Film, no one would say films about the Cold War or literature about, novels about the Cold War aren't useful things that we can study and we can look at and will help us, make sense when we're looking back and understand that. And games are exactly the same. They're part of our culture. We had in our issue 7, we had Dr. Malcolm Craig from Liverpool University wrote a really good thing for us about the games that were released at the height of the Cold War, and what we can, again, why that is as important as the films and the literature and music that were released at the same time, and can tell us about something. My huge thing is Warhammer in the 1980s. It's, a stupid, silly, for those who are watching this and don't know what Warhammer is, it's essentially a game where you spend a lot of money on toys that are about 3 centimeters high, and you have to build them and paint them, and it costs a fortune, and then you move them around the table and you fight battles. But behind all that, there is this ridiculous background to it all. And it was created by overeducated, unemployed young guys in the 80s who were all kind of ex-punks or punks. And if there's a big argument how much of it is kind of anti-authoritarian satire, anti-Thatcherite satire, and it goes back and forth. You can overplay that, but what you can't deny is that it was being created by people who were, the milieu that they were swimming in, the environment they were swimming in was 2000 AD. One of the best things Britain's ever produced. It was the young ones. It was, this kind of aggressive anti-authoritarian feel. And this was, they were creating this in Nottingham in the 1980s, devastated by Thatcherite reforms, whatever you want to do. And that comes through in the background of the game. And, you can, and just in the last few years, people have started taking that seriously, and you started getting universities hosting like weekends to, where people are discussing what does, Warhammer mean in terms of Britain's socio-political culture and all this kind of stuff. So for me, that's what's really interesting in trying to kind of present that, and try not to also be just too nostalgic, because, it'd be very easy to do the kind of Mojo magazine of games or something where we just focus on stuff of the 80s, because there's really good stuff happening now. There's like a game we featured last issue called The Triangle Agency, and it's written by these young guys, and it's exactly, you look at it and it's like it's all about kind of cosmic horror set in like offices and and this is young, that generation trying to make sense of their day-to-day existence, and just as some of them will
Mm.
write songs about it and some of them will write books about it, these these lot are out there writing games where your boss is a faithless void that is trying to turn the world insane or something like that, and in a few years time we'll be able to look at that and make some sense of that. And so much of the gaming press was focused just on the kind of surface level of it. And I'd rather talk, the whole thing with science is I wanted to sit down with these people and talk to them and be like, take them seriously. Like we might be talking about space wizards and, sentient jellies, but I also let's give them the respect that they deserve, good and bad. I don't want to be faced about it, because at the end of the day, it is space wizards 90% of the time. So, you've got a
And
bit
then,
like
and then I
that.
guess there's also the looking at it the other way around. So I believe your next issue is going to be looking at Tolkien and the effect of like his writing on not just games but like film and other literature. So I guess you
Yeah,
get to sort of flex it the other way.
exactly. I mean, the next issue is a whole Tolkien special, and it's great. And we've got some really interesting stuff in there, and it has allowed us, we've got 3 or 4 features on the big games of the moment, which are Tolkien related. But again, there we're talking with them and we're talking to the designers, and we're asking, we're trying to explore his ideas and his themes and how they're trying to translate that into game mechanics, because that's quite interesting. And what it means to them. What is their personal connection to Tolkien? For me, I've been reading that stuff, Hobbit when I was like 8 or 9 or something like that. I was obsessed with it as a teenager, and it's great to do. But then again, it's interesting, like you say, looking at how it's affected, how artistic representations of Tolkien. And there's a lot of very traditional, but then there's a lot of people who are working in, quite subversive ways with um, his ideas. We've got Dr. Francis Young, who's this brilliant folklorist. He's written this whole piece about um, Tolkien's elves and where they came from, because if you play role-playing games or board games or computer games, any of this thing, you will come across elves, and the elves that you come across will either be a direct, um, you know, directly taken from Tolkien, or on even rarer occasions when they're not, they're subverting what his ideas were. So they're still Tolkien related. So, it's where did these elves come from? So, we got this like proper folklorists to come and do an article on that. We're talking to some musicians who are doing doing this kind of Hobbit core is now a thing. People doing things. So it's there's lots of way of looking at it, and and it's great, and that's been something for the last couple of issues we've done. We've always covered art and stuff like that, but now we have this whole dedicated section just for kind of music, art, film, culture, which allows me, as you say, to spread my wings a bit and cover some more interesting stuff. And it's all stuff that I think it doesn't have to be gaming related, but it's stuff that I think will be the kind of people that I think read Wyrd Science, or generally what I'm into. So, like yesterday I interviewed Green Lung, really amazing heavy metal band. They've got a new album coming out in September. And they're like really, everything they do is like cloaked in like folklore and occult ideas and horror films. And, they're fantastic, and then I'm interviewing an electronica act who does something similar, but takes it from a completely different side. We got some, it gives you a chance to cover lots of books and films and all this stuff that's just interesting that I just think is part of this world. And also because, in an ideal world, you would have one magazine for games and one magazine for films and one magazine for this, that, and that. But, there's less and less magazines now. So you kind of have to crush everything in together. And also it's my way of having revenge on a lot of places where you'd have like NME or a music magazine or something like that, and then they'd have one page on computer games and treat it as like this thing. So I can treat music as, oh, and also at the same
Yeah,
point, there's
this
some
funny
music
little
going on.
fringe interest.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
for those, some people may have heard of music. For those of you who have, this is a band you might want to check out. So yeah,
John,
so
it's
good.
so good. It's so good hearing you talking about this stuff. I'm really looking forward to seeing the new quarterly version of Wyrd Science.
Thank you.
And I feel so bad for making you sit in this sweaty room and tell me about
Well,
it.
I just feel
So,
sorry for anyone who's had to look at me right now, because I look on a best day, I look like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards, but today I just look like I've been hosed down at the same time. So, but no, thank you so much for having me. I mean, it's lovely to chat about magazines, really.